Hi, my friends. Welcome. This is the Back to Me podcast, and this is Heather, and I am super excited that you're here. You are going to hear some tips and some tricks and some ideas to help you live your happiest and healthiest self. I call it Back to Me because when you are taking care of yourself, back to me, then you can take better care of others, and we can all make the world a better place. This is Wellness Your Way, and I am super happy that you're here. Yay! Hello, my friends. Welcome to the Back to Me podcast. How'd you like the intro for the people watching the video? People who have listened to the audio version have heard that intro before, but I just added it to the video. So, boom, there it is. Today, I am talking with Barbara Symons. And hey, Barbara, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing great. How about you?
I'm pretty good. We were commenting that we're wearing kind of matching colors today, and I'm all cozied up because it's coming on to fall here when we're doing this recording. Well, I guess it's officially fall, isn't it?
Yeah.
And the temperature, I like seasons. I'm not going to complain. So we are going to talk some interesting topics today, I think. So Barbara, you are an author, and was your first book Escaping Christianity?
It was.
Right. But so the first question, my audience knows this, the first question I always ask is, what led you to this place that you are now? And I know it's going to be a story because I was reading your bio. It's like, wow. So what, I guess, because you were deep into the religious world, and maybe you can talk about that a little bit, but also what made you change? What changed for you?
Well, I was within Christian fundamentalism for 43 years. And there came a time when it stopped making sense to me. I would ponder things like, geez, why would God tell us to love and to forgive and to pray for our enemies while he tortured his in a burning inferno forever? The things that didn't make sense anymore.
Right.
And so I had to just take the leap and begin to study on my own. And I began to speak about some of the things that I was learning. And that's not necessarily a good thing to do when you're in the church system. So I experienced a little bit of shunning and people trying to muzzle, me and what I was saying. But man, I was feeling free after being in the system for 43 years, and there really was no stopping, no stopping me after that.
You're like the Catholic schoolgirl let out on the weekends. Woohoo!
For sure. Yeah.
And so I asked this, I had a client a while ago who was also since she was a little kid, I'm going to use the word indoctrinated into one of the major religions. And she did the same thing. She started asking those questions of the why and how does it work, and, things that don't totally make sense. And there was no answers, but she was really struggling. So you were a little bit shunned, but did you struggle with that departure from like creating this new version of you, like leaving that 40 odd years is a long time to be in something, right? That's a huge change for people to make.
Right. And I did struggle. I had to come to terms with who I was outside of the system. I had to come to terms with what I believed. And when you depart the system, I really felt like I had to leave because the people that were still within the system, they weren't ready to leave. But Christians, especially Christian fundamentalists like I was, were kind of hardwired to proselytize. Mm. And so we want everyone to come with us and to do what we do. And I made that mistake. for years before I realized, you know what, they're good where they are. They're learning. Why, what in me, in my ego, feels that I need to make them anything different. And so I really started working on me. It probably took me longer than a couple of years.
I think it's an ongoing process for me.
And so I just had to, I had to work on me.
Right.
And so that's a work in progress.
Right. Yeah. And it's true. And there's a fine line between wanting to share something that you've discovered that's amazing and wanting to make everybody the same. Like, because I have that tendency when I learn something new, I get super excited and I want to tell everybody about it if it's like made something really cool in my life. And I'm an eternal student. But there's a line there for me that it's like, I think this is really cool. I'll show you if you want. Right. And if you do try it and you don't like it, I'm not going to be upset about it. But I can spot them walking around downtown all the time, the young men in their suits with their little name tags. And I know they're going door to door. And I avoid them because I know that maybe the way it's presented, they're not looking for what they do.
Your audio is muffled.
Is it?
Yeah.
How's that? Is that better?
But I know what you're saying. They're the Mormons are in suits, and I know that they're just doing what they've been trained to do.
Right, and everybody's got a belief. I actually am multi-denominational. I think all the religions are partly right and mostly wrong.
It's a good way to put it.
Yeah, it's like the core part of it is right, which is love. It's everything else that they put on top of it. The rules, the others, I don't even know what to call it, pomp and ceremony. That's the stuff that seems to have gotten a bit out of hand.
Yes, dogma.
That's just my personal opinion. Not everybody's going to share it. So when you wrote your book, so it's called the first book, Escaping Christianity. So were you writing that for yourself as part of your process?
Yes. It's called Escaping Christianity, Finding Christ. So people often say, why did you call it Escaping Christianity? And because that's a little edgy. But
people look.
Yeah, I describe it like this. If I was in Los Angeles, maybe in a sketchy part of Los Angeles, and maybe I found myself the victim of a mugging, and maybe I was accosted and got a black eye or something like that, I might write a book called Escaping Los Angeles. That doesn't mean that the whole of it is bad.
Right.
But that certainly there are elements within the total, the holistic view of what Christianity espouses that is harmful or was harmful for me. And so the subtitle, Escaping Christianity, Finding Christ, just lets the reader know that I haven't thrown the baby out with the bathwater, that I may define things differently than what I used to, but that what I found has value. And I felt that other people would benefit from my story, which the book is really about my journey, starting as early as 4 years old within Christian fundamentalism all the way up to age 43. And it was a wonderful journey, but I am more than happy to be out.
Right.
And, I'm much more free. I can read other books without being, I was told to burn my books that were not Christian books. If you're not familiar with fundamentalism, Heather, it can be pretty restrictive. I
know there's restrictions, and I've probably because I am one of those kids who you could never tell me what to do. I remember in school, some of the girls had to dress in such and such a way, and it all seemed to be a lot of restrictions on girls. You're not allowed to do this. You have to be like this. And of course, the young me went, oh, hell no. You can't tell me what to do. Not that my parents ever tried that, but they once threatened me with Catholic school if I didn't straighten myself out. And I said, just try. So, but so the lessons that you were learning, that you were sharing in the book, do you have something you could share with people to give them some kind of assistance if they're in that place where they're like, I don't know if this is right. What steps what things do you find, or maybe what I'm trying to say is, what do you find supported you?
Oh gosh. Well, the story that comes to mind is something that happened to our family in 2005 that literally turned me completely around. I had been not going to church since 1999, but in 2005, the experience that I had, I had an out-of-body experience, and I had a group of beings speak to me and tell me things that turned my world around. And what happened was, well, first of all, my son came home in 2001, sporting a tattoo with this huge angel on his back. And he told me that I didn't have to worry when he was over in Iraq, that an angel had his back.
Okay.
So fast forward to 2005, he and my husband and my youngest son were on motorcycles, and they were on their way to Houston, 60 miles from here, to a motorcycle show. And for whatever reason, Chris departed the travel lane and began to travel in the oncoming lane to pass a vehicle. And my husband thought it was a little risky, but he didn't see any oncoming cars. So my son, Chris, just continued. And my husband saw an oncoming Ford F-250.
Those are big trucks.
And Chris, my son, would not depart the oncoming traffic lane. He just stayed in it. And Lyle my husband, his name is Lyle, was thinking, what are you doing? And, but an impact happened Chris was going 70 and the pickup truck was going 70. It was a combined impact of 140 miles an hour. And Chris's arm came off at impact, and his hip was split open from hip to ankle. My husband skidded to a stop. My son skidded to a stop. There were the engine chassis of Chris's motorcycle was jettisoned back at them on their bikes. And Chris, my son, was laying on the side of the road, and there was no pulse, no respiration, and he wasn't even bleeding because he was gone. Right. And Lyle, my husband, he said his knees gave out when he got to Chris, and he was pallor. He said his tongue was down and hanging out to the side, and he had the look of death, obviously. And he said he gathered Chris up in his arms and pulled him to his chest, and he said that a sound came out of his body that was unfamiliar and involuntary, but it was a groan. It was very deep grief. And he finished after a minute or so and laid Chris back down on the ground, and there was nothing. There was a lifeless, very damaged body laying there. And he looked up and made eye contact with my son, Keith, my youngest son, asked if he was okay, and traffic had been stopping, and there was the smell of gasoline in the air and debris, scattered all over the street. And people were beginning to stop their cars. And Lyle turned and looked down at Chris again. And this time he said his knees buckled again. And he grabbed Chris's whole body and pulled it up to his chest. And he said, and once again, this involuntary, he described it as a wail, came out of his body. And after a minute or two, he laid him back down again, and he stood up. And there was a woman that was running towards him saying, let me through, I'm an off-duty EMT. Let me through, I'm an EMT. Because she had street clothes on. And
right.
And he just said, he's gone. I don't think he's gone. And she turned and looked down at Chris and said, no, sir, he's not. And Lyle turned to look down at Chris, and the color of life had returned to his face, and blood was pumping out of his arm through severed arteries. And she, being an off-duty EMT, and her husband was an off-duty fireman paramedic, first on the scene, had bungee cords. And, he came walking up with Chris's severed arm, walking down the street. And
that's so weird.
It's an incredible story, and I go into detail with it in chapter 3, but they bound up his wounds. They got an ambulance there. The ambulance called Life Flight, Flight for Life. They transported him to the top trauma center in Houston. Lyle called me, lied to me, and told me that Chris has a broken leg. You probably need to come down and see him. And so I picked up his fiance and headed down there. But later on that evening, while we were in the waiting room of the emergency room, I was walking around this beautiful saltwater aquarium, and my mind kind of went still. I was outwardly calm, but inwardly hysterical.
Right.
Mind was racing 1,000,000 miles an hour, and I was thinking such strange things like, how is he going to learn to walk if he can't grip a crutch? If both of his limbs on his left side where the impact occurred are gone, how is that going to work? And so I was thinking things that I was projecting way out ahead, And so I stopped, and I remember looking at the movement of the fish and how calm it was. And of course, people are kind of quiet in the emergency waiting room. Everybody going through their own traumatic experiences. And I felt a lifting up of my body. I'm not an out of body kind of person. I don't, but it felt like I came out of my body about an inch and a half. And I heard a voice speak to me, or a group of voices. And it said, Barbara, it's time for you to remember that he chose this, and so did you. And all of a sudden I was back on my feet. The fish were moving in the tank again. And I thought to myself, no, he didn't. No, I didn't. What mother would you, what is it? And questioning the voice as if to validate that I even heard it. And as I stopped for a moment, the voices continued. And they said, you are thinking as a human, couched in biology. But when you chose this, you were not human yet.
Yeah.
But we all choose our lives' experiences. And we assure you that there is no suffering in vain, that all has value, but it's time for you to remember. Changed my world.
Right.
Chris is now a father of 2, running a business here in the city with his brothers and thriving. He's missing a couple of body parts, but he's doing incredibly well. But, the impact was 140 miles an hour and he was not wearing a helmet.
What?
Right. Not wearing a helmet. So, this is the miracle. And my husband raised him from the dead.
I'm sorry. What is it with you guys in helmets? Like, come on.
Texas is pretty liberal.
I know. Oh my goodness.
But at the end of the day, he's thriving. He's doing well. But that experience changed. I thought leaving the church structure was a big change, but that was even a bigger change when I came to accept and understand that we had a choice in the matter of the things that we would experience. And when I speak to people, especially when I speak in a crowded room, there are women in there that have been raped or that have experienced the loss of a child. But, I earned the right to speak frankly by going through this and said, we don't understand. You think you chose this as a human, but you weren't human. You didn't know what was evil and what was good, what was dark and what was light. You only saw purpose. And so you made choices that would best fulfill your syllabus while here on planet Earth. And those are things, Heather, that I never would have learned in church.
No, you definitely would
not. No. And, I still have trouble with people trying to kind of muzzle me from, the things that I say and teach and speak about. But you know what? This is a big story that we're involved in. And there is no end to learning. And I do know that I was in great restriction within religion, within the religious community, because they have to control the narrative in order to survive.
Well, controlling the narrative, to survive, because their survival depends on people following
exactly
what they say, right? I know that the Vatican is like the richest nation group, and yet you can see people suffering everywhere.
Right.
With lack. I'm like, well, aren't you supposed to help people? Let's just look at this kind of balanced system. But the interesting thing about what happened to you is, have you heard of the Akashic Records?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm an Akashic Records reader, and people will ask me questions about why something happened, and they are constantly reminding me and the people who I help that they call it a 3D body. You're in your 3D body, but your soul level, there is no good or bad. There is no, none of this thing that you're using to evaluate the human experience.
Mm-hmm.
You just had a list of experiences you wanted, tick, tick, tick. When you get here, you're like, oh, I don't want that one. But your soul level did.
Right.
Right? To go feel all the feels and do all the things that you came here to do. And sadly, from a human perspective, some of those things are hard to go through.
Right.
Right?
Right.
But if you can and I'm so awesome that they actually came in and went, Barbara, hey, boom, wake up.
Yeah.
You chose this, smack, smack. And that you accepted the message.
Right.
Because some people can get the message and go, hell no, I did not. But if you can just not be upset with yourself for having selected it, not blame anybody else for the selection. I find it really interesting that your son, well, not that he chose that, but that he chose to do it in that way where I'm just like, I'm just going to drive straight into a truck. I mean, most people would have gotten out of the way at least a little bit.
I know, it's really strange. We have no reason. And why didn't the truck move?
Right?
Heather, none of it makes any sense.
None of it makes any sense.
So Chris has no memory from 2 weeks before the wreck and 2 weeks after the wreck. the guy that he impacted has no excuse why he didn't move out of the way. At the very last split second, Chris jerked his handlebars to the right, and the driver, because he was headed right to the center of the vehicle. At the last minute, he jerked, the truck jerked that way, and Chris jerked that way. And so he clipped the left, part of the body. But the driver is like, I don't know what happened.
It's like they were both in some kind of trance or something, right? Just like,
we couldn't figure it out.
Like watching a TV show, you're just watching it happen and you're somehow not connected to what's going on.
But the reason that I said that he came home with this big tattoo on his back and telling me I'll be fine when I'm over in Iraq because an angel's got my back. I mean, how devastating that would have been if it happened overseas.
Right.
And, number one. And number two, like a year after his wreck, now this is 5 years after he got his tattoo, he came over one day and he was just learning how to walk with his prosthetic, and he pulled off his t-shirt and he said, "Mom, look at my tattoo on my back. Really look at it." And I said, "Okay, sweetheart, I'm looking at it. What do you want me to see?" And he said, "Mom, look at what's not there. Look carefully." And I realized that the angel was missing a hand and a foot.
What?
Mm-hmm. It had never been tattooed in place.
Like before he got it, like before the accident.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
I know. And and my husband, it was April. So the wreck happened in November. In April, my husband sat straight up in bed one night and he was soaking wet with sweat. And I was kind of jolted awake, and I said, "What's wrong?" And he said, "I had this vision." And he said, "I see Chris without limbs, without any limbs." He said, "He's just sitting there with a black background and he has no limbs." And he said, what do you think that is? So I interpret dreams. And I said, "I don't know. Maybe it's just some fear left over from when he was in Iraq, because there were always, roadside bombs, and he was a driver, and IEDs, exploding. And so anyway, the next night, Heather, he wakes up again and he shoots straight up in bed. And I'm like, "Huh, did it happen again?" He said, "Yes, but this time he was missing 2 limbs." And I said, "Well, what in the world?" And I mean, soaked with sweat, gets up, kind of washcloths off and comes back to bed. And then the next night it happens again. And so now, fast forward several months, I'm walking into the emergency, waiting area. I walk in and I see Lyle walking from across the other side of the room. And he said, "Barbara, come here." And I said, "Hi, are you okay? I mean, where's Chris?" And because I just, again, thought he had a broken leg.
Right.
And he said to me, "Barbara, his arm came off at impact." And I looked at him, and what mother would do this, Heather? But I looked at him and I said, "Sweetheart, you have to remember your dreams. We've been prepared for this."
Right.
Who would say something like that?
You.
But the thing is that we were prepared. Us at our highest level, there's no boundary of time.
No.
Or space. We can see, forward and backward and everything in between. So we knew at some level of consciousness that this was coming down the pike. His tattoo, Lyle's dreams. I was like, wow. And those kind of things helped us overcome the trauma in that moment. They really helped us. Yeah.
That's amazing. Like that story by itself is huge, right? That trusting that, yes, there's stuff's going to happen, but it's stuff that you can handle. It's stuff you can deal with. And it's not so huge that everything goes sideways.
Right.
And being open to staying kind of present in that, and staying present in the, it's going to be okay, because this is, I don't use the word fate, because fate is such a weird fatalistic. Fate is fatalistic, but it is something with a different purpose. And did you go back to the church?
The only time that I've been back is to go to funerals and weddings.
Yeah.
But, my son, so he's just learning to walk again, and he runs into an old church friend of mine. And she said, we heard about your accident and we're praying for you, which is so kind. I'm so thankful. But then she said this: if you'd have been in church, this wouldn't have happened.
That's not true.
And my son, so full of grace, was just kind. And I was like, what do you mean she said that? Let me at her, But he's so full of grace, and he's so charming. And he just, hugged her and blessed her and went on his way.
Wow, he took the high road.
He did, and I would not have.
But that's awesome, because she wouldn't have been able to hear anything anyway.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
It's, you meet people where they are, perhaps plant a seed of potential possibility for something different, and just leave it at that, right?
Well, you're a charming woman for doing that, because I'm getting there. I wasn't there, for the first, but it seems like, and it's a process, and there's a whole movement called deconstruction. I don't know if you've heard about it, but it's a whole movement of many, many Christian fundamentalists pulling away and deconstructing their faith, because a lot of, and I'm just going to say this, but a lot of what Christian fundamentalists have gone through is very deep psychological programming.
It is.
And so if you think about, and most people don't have support when they come out. So, especially, me 25 years ago, I was a fish out of water. There was no support online. I mean, people barely knew how to Google. What that
I know. I was like 25 years ago. We were barely online.
And so it was very hard for me, but I did have something that I hung on to. And throughout the night, after his wreck, and, we got to go up to see him it was called the STICU, which is the shock trauma intensive care unit. And he didn't even look like himself. His blood pressure was so low. They gave him 28 units of plasma, blood, and 8 units of plasma, just to keep his blood pressure up. So he was very bloated. His blood pressure was 50/20.
Wow.
And so they were, afraid of losing him. Lyle and I were kind of oblivious to that. We were just planning on how he was going to use a crutch, I mean, we didn't even think he was going to, pass away. And, but while I was up in his room, I heard that group of voices again. And I was by myself, because you could only have one person in there at a time. And the voices told me to bridge the gap. Bridge the gap. Bridge the gap.
Which gap?
I don't know. And they repeated it and repeated it. Heather, I thought I was losing my mind. And I finally said, I can hear you. You need to cut it out, because this is a very real situation here. I need to tend to my son on a physical level. If you want to talk to me, wait until I'm out of here, but leave me alone. I will do whatever that means. You'll have to tell me what that means. So the next morning, after having no sleep, maybe 15 minutes, I'm walking down this very long corridor that was like, it connected two different medical campuses, and it was at least 2 football fields in length. And I'm still hearing this bridge the gap, bridge the gap, bridge the gap. And I'm like, oh my gosh, give it a rest. My eyes are swollen. I have no makeup on. I'm, ragged, haggard looking. And I'm walking down during shift change, and there's just this sea of scrubs, greens and blues and, whites and surgeons and hats and gowns and, little foot booties and stuff. And from a long way away, I saw a very tall gentleman that it looked like his hair was like a football helmet. It was just big, but he was like maybe 6'8".
Wow.
He was incredibly tall. And so from a distance, Heather, I'm watching him walk toward me. And he had this really unusual gait. I mean, he was walking and his head was kind of flopping back and forth. And I just looked up at him and I thought, what an odd looking gentleman. and as I'm walking and he's getting closer, he's so tall. And as the sea of scrubs, parted, I could see that he had on a shirt that said Gap. I know. And I thought, this is what I thought to myself. Okay, I see it. Is that what you wanted me to see? Okay, I know that something is going on here that is rather unusual, but I mean, I had my share of unusual experiences, but I said, I got it. And so the guy keeps on coming towards me, but only now he's looking directly at me. And you can tell there's an incredibly marvelous connection when someone looks at you eye to eye. Excuse me. And so he was looking at me eye to eye, and now he's maybe 6 feet from me. And I look down at his shirt, and there are 2 more words written over the top. Bridge the gap. And I looked at him, and my mouth dropped open, and he kept looking at me, and we locked eyes, and he was, already 5 feet past me, and he was still looking at me. And I thought, that was a messenger. And I said, I don't know what it means, but I will dedicate my life to figuring it out. And I have.
What is it?
Bridging the gap is between the natural and the supernatural. Between the age and the age to come. And it's different. Where we're heading, and through, if you know anything about geometry and the overlapping of circles in that Vesca Pisces place.
Oh, yeah.
Where the Christ is born through the cosmic birth, portal. That is an age that we are transitioning into, where Christ, which is the God-man, it's the divine and the human together in cooperation in one body. And we are learning how to process information. We're learning how to see into other dimensions. We're learning how to hear and use our intuitive gift. So I know that bridging the gap is helping people step from a very dense, third-dimensional, biology-based body into something that is not so dense.
Right.
That is more spirit, something that is magical and mystical and wonderful and supernatural.
And it's funny because we used to call, things like a pen would be called supernatural at some point, 100 years ago. Oh, that's witchcraft. But I think of it as, we call it supernatural because we don't understand it, but I feel like it's more like just an unknown nature.
Yes.
Right? And that the more that you allow that unknown nature to be experienced maybe, or
Mm.
be curious about it, then the faster the shift will happen,
Mm.
right?
Mhm. It's very cool.
Yeah, it's totally cool. I remember the first time I talked to the Akashic Records readers. They always sounded either like Yoda or Dr. Seuss. And they teased me a lot because that's what they needed to do to have me just relax. They would just tease me all the time. So now we're getting down to business with them. They're like, let's get down to business. And I think that's another one of those like just ways to enter into that the bigger energy than the dense 3D energy, right? The bigger energy of what's going on that I think little kids can perceive. You have how many grandkids? 10? And a
I,
great-grandchild?
I have 11, yeah. And one of them is a great-grandchild.
And when they're really little, I think they have a better chance. They have more
Absolutely.
seeing. Like I used to see fairies and gnomes in the laundry pile. It would keep me up at night watching them because I didn't know what they were. And I don't know if my mom knows that. If she's listening, Mom, I see things in the laundry. But I like that it's becoming okay to talk about. And I find that some of the reaction is more of a tightening and encircling of the dogmas of certain religions are trying to stop that opening and that flowering.
Right.
So I want to keep the conversations open and happening as part of my service to help raising that consciousness.
Yeah, exactly. And, I'm coming to the place where I am more tolerant and accepting and know that everybody serves a purpose where they are. And that I don't have to, I'm not here to change anybody. I think the Arcturians say this beautiful quote that I started my book with. I'm not here to drag someone kicking and screaming into a different reality.
Right.
All I want to do is raise my level of consciousness enough that I become a vibrational match, through the dead zone that kind of buffers this dimension into the next, where I can be a bridge, where I can bridge that gap.
Bridge the gap.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Oh my goodness. I feel like there's many, many stories coming out of this. Now, because I know people are going to be super curious, because I know that I am, so that means that they are. So they can find you on Facebook, and I'm going to make sure I put that into the show notes.
Mm-hmm.
What's it called? I saw it earlier over here on my little list. Oh, it's your name, Barbara Symons. Is your website got a link to your Facebook in case they can't find you?
If they want my website, which again I wish I kept up with it, but Facebook is so easy.
It is easy,
but my website not so easy. But if you Google Barbara Symons, you'll get to my website.
Right.
So it's barbarasymons.com or escapingchristianity.com.
That's probably easy too, right?
Yeah.
And I know we didn't talk. You had another book too, right? We didn't talk about that one, but
it's a stout book. There's 444 pages of teaching in here over a 6-year period of time on social media and platforms that are e-based.
So what's the title of that one for people who are on the audio?
It's Musings from an Ex-Christian Fundamentalist.
There you go.
And there I am. That's my eye.
Beautiful. That's awesome. Oh my gosh, I love that.
Yeah.
So, Barbara, oh my gosh, thank you so much, because your story is fascinating and super. I get super excited when I hear about that kind of thing, like that kind of experience. And I love that you're out there sharing that with the world. Really.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Friends, make sure you go and at least go to escapingchristianity.com and find all the things. If you got to start somewhere, check the show notes. If you can't find something, make sure you send me a message because I will hook you up. Before we go, Barbara, I always give my guests the last words of wisdom. Do you have something that's going to drop in that you think the audience would like to hear?
One of my favorite things, because I experience so much judgment, because I have so much buffeting come from my tribe. It's just important that people know that we can't get this wrong, that it really is okay to explore and to search and to be sojourners. We're not going to make God mad at us. He just loves us. God, divinity, spirit, whatever you want to call it. Religion really does have it pretty much wrong. Like you said, he's not some tyrant. It's just love. And we're here banging it out, trying to do our best to learn all that we can in the lifetimes that we get. And we can relax because we can't get it wrong.
I love it. Thank you so much. That is perfect way to end the show. Yeah. Friends in podcast land, send this to someone who needs to know that they can't get it wrong.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Barbara.
Well, thank you.
Take care, my friends. And we will see you next time.
Bye.
Hi, my friend. Thanks so much for listening to this entire podcast. If you found it useful and you're like me and you like helping others, please feel free to share this. Give it a like, give it a comment. If you found something useful in it, there's a chance that someone else will find something useful as well. Also, if you have any questions at all, I can absolutely help, and I would love to help. You can email me at heather@prosperityflowcoaching.com. If you want more of this awesome content, you can follow me on Instagram, Heather Stewart Coaching. You can follow me on Facebook, Prosperity Flow Coaching. And I have a personal request. I want to help as many people as I can with these podcasts. And if you could give me a review, hopefully a good one, if you could share, if you could send this out into the world, I would truly appreciate it. I hope you have an amazing day, and I hope that you find your way to wellness by getting back to me. Take care, my friend.